Today, some sliding door moments on the fractured Australian property market. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, World latest post covering finance and property news. Australia's housing crisis is a key issue in this year's election, and as the campaigns run on, yawn, housing remains a central issue, but both parties are playing games rather than getting to the heart of the issues. So today, I want to go through 3 cameos which bring out some of the critical issues that need to be explored, but aren't necessarily in their current campaigns. I call these sliding door moments because these seemingly inconsequential moments can dramatically alter the trajectory of future events. The term comes from the 1998 film Sliding Doors, which explores how one minor event, missing a train, can lead to drastically different outcomes in a person's life. These moments, which seemingly may be insignificant, can have a ripple effect on a person's life, affecting relationships, careers, and even mortality. The first is the ongoing rental crisis, and I made a post recently on the problem that 1/3 of households are struggling with. But if this sounds rather academic, then my earlier show where I spoke to Morgan Cox, who's become something of a celebrity following his straightforward question on ABC Q&A, makes the issue, well, personal. And Morgan continues his quest to raise the issue of homelessness, as Albo now has a new neighbour. Cox has set up his tent outside the PM's mansion in protest of the housing crisis. He says, "I'm trying to send a message to the government." This from a recent ex-post via Newsmax Australia.
Is Albo's $4.65 million mansion. I felt like this might get his attention. 3.5 million people at least are in pretty desperate poverty and facing homelessness. I feel like the government's just not listening to us. And this might be the only way that I know to get their attention. Bottom line, I just want the government to listen to the people who are suffering, and I want them to do something about it instead of just talking all the time. I want them to actually do something. I've had a couple of people that seem a bit upset, but I don't really understand what's offensive about everyone deserves a home. I feel like most people would agree with that. I certainly hope the government does. It's a tent on wheels. It's legally registered and roadworthy, which is a key thing, because I try to make sure that I'm not doing anything wrong. It's actually not bad, and if I end up homeless, it's good to have. I've been homeless in the past. I have been facing homelessness, and I have a number of homeless people living in my street, in parks around my house, and at the local park near the shopping centre. Elderly lady living in a car. This is lovely, normal people, and there's just no reason why in one of the richest countries in the world these people should have nowhere to live. It just boggles my mind that it seems like the most important topic that no one is talking about.
However, now police have advised Morgan to remove any names from his sign outside Albanese's $4.6 million beachfront mansion. Morgan says New South Wales Police visited him last night and said while he was not doing anything wrong, police told him the names were an issue. And while not directing him, that if anyone's names were not removed, the police said, "We'll have to keep coming out."
I don't see why it should be wrong to address the sign to the Prime Minister or anyone else, especially when they're the Prime Minister. I guess I had falsely assumed that we were allowed to speak, especially when it's our own vehicle. Those signs on it. That's what the police asked for. That's what you have to do.
Yep. The second issue is homelessness versus development. As Bloomberg reported recently on a quiet bend of Selwyn Street in Sydney's affluent Paddington, 2 rundown houses stand as stark symbols of Australia's escalating housing crisis. Home to elderly, low-income men, the buildings sit among elegant Victorian terraces on some of the country's most coveted real estate, a magnet for the investors in one of the world's most expensive property markets. In late 2022, developer LFT Development snapped up the buildings known as the Selwyn Street boarding houses, with plans to replace them with 4 luxury homes. Under threat of eviction, most of the 28 men who lived there moved out this year, with just 4 remaining. Now, as housing affordability dominates the national agenda ahead of the election, the battle to save this rare pocket of inner-city low-income housing has gained momentum. In Sydney, where rental shortages are severe and housing among the least affordable anywhere, the looming demolition of the Selwyn Street homes has galvanised the local community, the City of Sydney Council, and the state government to take a stand. This is one of multiple examples across the state and city where vulnerable people are forced out of their homes and into social housing queues that go around the block, said Michael Mannix, age 59, a long-time resident of the neighbourhood who has been working to help tenants relocate. In November 2023, the council rejected the development application, arguing it would further erode housing affordability, and since then the City of Sydney and the New South Wales Government have together offered to buy the property to preserve it, an offer the developer declined. LFD Developments is now appealing the decision with the next court date set for May. The company did not respond to requests for comment from Bloomberg. If the appeal fails, it will set a powerful precedent for protecting boarding houses across the city, according to Sydney councillor Sylvie Elsmore. Boarding houses have been part of Sydney's landscape since the late 19th century, serving as community-style accommodation for workers, pensioners and low-income residents. The Selwyn Street houses, with their 32 rooms, narrow hallways and creaky floorboards and shared kitchens, laundry and bathrooms, weren't glamorous, but they were home to dozens of men. Once a working-class neighbourhood, Paddington, east of Sydney's central business district, has evolved into one of the city's most sought-after postcodes, attracting wealthy business people, politicians and TV personalities. Today, art galleries, stylish cafes and independent fashion stores line the high street. The draw to turn large old boarding houses into more profitable developments is seductive. While we acknowledge the impact of the forthcoming eviction on the current residents, we cannot prevent a private owner from redeveloping their property, the New South Wales Minister for Housing, Rose Jackson, said in a recent statement. The New South Wales Government plans to invest $5.1 billion to build 8,400 new public homes, in addition to a $528 million homelessness package. Our mission is to ensure experiences of homelessness are rare, brief and not repeated, Jackson said. But in the city of Sydney, that's a 26 square kilometre area, which includes waterfront urban suburbs like Elizabeth Bay and Potts Point, there are 294 registered boarding houses, according to council documents. Over the 10 years since 2014, the city's lost 400 boarding houses, and over the same period, the council received just 14 development applications. Allegra Spender, the independent federal member of Parliament for Wentworth, whose electorate covers the Selwyn Street development and also includes some of Australia's most expensive suburbs, says the government must incentivise developers to retain and protect affordable housing stock under a nationwide plan launched in 2022 to boost housing supply and affordability. Spender, who is likely to retain her seat at the election, is calling for density requirements to be considered in planning. Still, even saving the Selwyn Street homes will be a patch on a far bigger problem, as affordable housing tenants are increasingly squeezed out of desirable neighbourhoods with few choices about where to go. Indeed, most of the residents of the boarding houses have moved to far-flung areas as they are priced out of nearby suburbs. Underlining the paltry investments in cheap housing lately, data from the National Housing Supply and Affordability Council shows social housing now represents just 3.8% of total dwellings, down from 5.6% in 1991, even as demand has surged. Wait lists for public housing have jumped by 9% since 2020, and homelessness has increased by 36% since 2006. One of the things great about the inner cities is that a lot of people from different backgrounds get to live together, said Councillor Elsmore. The more luxury apartments we get for less people, the less diverse our communities become. We are all poorer for it. And finally, build to rent, as typified by Sydney's outer suburban hub of Parramatta, where there is an overgrown patch of land sandwiched between the train station and a Westfield Mall, but which is also emblematic of the battle lines forming around the future of housing and who will run Australia. Urban Property Group, a developer, is planning to build on the site a 46-storey tower of build-to-rent housing, a previously uncommon type of accommodation in Australia where renters pay a company rather than individual landlord. Urban Properties Group's mixed-use development has 600 apartments, a 200-room hotel, and retail space, and it's just one of the many that are coming up across Greater Sydney. The company's head of planning, Chris Ferrier, says the tides are turning in favour of more build-to-rent developments. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's Labour government sees such housing as playing a role in fixing the nation's housing affordability crisis. But Peter Dutton's Liberal National Opposition argues those types of developments will lead to a generation of renters in a nation where home ownership is equated with success and security. It wants more standalone homes instead, and the Greens, who could be critical players in what could be shaping up to be a tight election, wants more public housing and caps on rental increases. Do any of the parties properly address this issue? No, said Hal Pawson, Professor of Housing Research and Policy at the University of New South Wales in Sydney. The gravity of the housing crisis calls for much more substantial measures. Housing in Australia is among the costliest in the world, especially in Sydney, where the average home costs almost 14 times annual disposable income, and rents have also been soaring too. Combined with sticky inflation that has prevented the central bank from joining global peers in an interest rate cutting cycle, and also record immigration levels that have exacerbated the housing shortage, Australia's living standards are going backwards at the worst possible time for Albanese's re-election prospects. Labor holds Parramatta with a majority of around 4%, putting it in the swathe of swing seats it will need to hold to retain power. And Labour's member for Parramatta is Andrew Charlton, a rising star in the party who has previously been an economic advisor to former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. Charlton said there was no doubt that housing is a very important issue at the upcoming poll. This is an issue which is really fundamental to how people feel about Australia, he said in a Bloomberg interview in his office. The opportunity to have a home, the aspiration to own a home, these are things that are core to Australia's promise as a nation. The Conservative opposition doesn't support expanding build to rent, saying Australians don't need corporate landlords. Shadow Assistant Housing spokesman Andrew Bragg says the coalition wants to encourage more construction of housing on greenfield sites on the outskirts of cities and greater support for first home buyers. We want to find practical ways to tilt the scales for first home buyers, Bragg said, pointing to the opposition's policy that would allow Australians to take up to 50,000 Aussie dollars out of their private pensions to help pay for a house deposit. My biggest fear is that we're becoming a country where effectively Australians are becoming perpetual renters to corporate landlords. A recent survey by Pollster Essential found around 20% of Australian voters thought the government was doing enough to provide more affordable accommodation, with more than 50% saying they were disappointed with Albanese's performance on the issue. International evidence on the benefits of build to rent in alleviating housing affordability crunches isn't actually conclusive. In the UK, for example, the BTR market has exploded since 2012, but UNSW's Pawson says it's not clear if it helped keep prices down. And in Canada, where purpose-built rental accommodation blocks are a much larger and more established element of the housing system, there were worries that they are increasingly becoming acquired, upgraded and gentrified. In Australia's case, the majority of build-to-rent projects to date have been premium products targeting mid to high income households, and even with a recently legislated affordability clause that applies to 10% of homes within developments, they'll still be, quote, beyond the means of low income earners, Pawson said. Charlton says that while there's frustration over the housing crisis, he believed voters realised it was a long-term issue that hadn't started with this Labour government, which came to power in May 2022. They recognise that this problem has been brewing for a long time, and I think they recognise that they have a government that is out there every day talking about what we're doing to solve it, he said. Part of Albanese's strategy, of course, is to pledge 1.2 million dwellings by 2029, a goal that every state and territory government has signed up to, but it's a big target and one that will be very difficult to meet. That's because whoever wins the election will need to solve two crises at the same time: a chronic, retrospective housing shortage and a lack of future supply. And fixing those won't happen overnight, if at all. But my point is that through this election campaign, those critical issues, build to rent, homelessness, pressure on the rental sector, and trying to safeguard the character of inner city areas in particular, haven't been discussed at all. So once again, my conclusion is this: the politicians love talking about housing, want to be appearing to be doing things to solve the problem, but frankly, they fall short, dramatically short. And so the solution is not yet over the hill, which means the problem will continue for another generation or two, which is not good for Australia, not good for Australians, and nor for the broader society. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.